you feeling about it? Any weird confusion moments? Dual agency? Is that a problem? We're going to hopefully clarify anything like that tonight. But that's a little tough to grasp at first. So don't feel bad if that's what's happening. Thank you in the chat. So let's recap a little bit. We talked about how agency started all the way up to the 50s. The only kind of agency was what kind? What kind of agency was the only kind of agency? You got it. Only sellers had a legal person that could represent them. There was no legal type of agency offered. Now, that doesn't mean people didn't act like it improperly. So in the 50s, I don't know if you can see this, just kind of cranking out some notes here. Seller agency only. And I'm pretty sure, though, that if a buyer walked into a real estate agent's office, that agent would help them. And they might even act like a buyer's agent. But there was no legal basis for it. What they should have been doing that whole time they were acting and working for that buyer is telling everything they learned about the buyer to the seller. Because that's to whom they owed their fiduciary duties. And so fast forward to the 60s, then we had this thing that started called cooperation. The birth of the MLS. And so that allowed agents to sell each other's listings and have some sort of an arrangement, an agreed upon arrangement. Hey, if I sell your listing, you will pay me because we both subscribe to this multiple listing service. You can think subscribers. That's what's happening there. And that's what it is today. One of the things you'll do, one of the reasons I showed you that money worksheet or that money slide in the very first night was not to scare you and discourage you. It was to tell you, look, you've got some more things to spend money on besides this class. To subscribe to the MLS is one of them. So they will prorate and then ultimately charge you. I believe it's about, I pay more since I'm a broker in charge, but I think it's around $200 per quarter to access the multiple listing service, and another $35 a quarter to have the app on your phone so that you can let people into houses, use the lockbox system. And so that's what it was back then. It's what it is now. When you belong to the multiple listing service, you're saying to all of those other subscribers, hey, if you sell my listing, since you're one of my fellow subscribers in this MLS, then I have posted in my listing data sheet how much I'm going to pay you. And it's right there at the bottom of the page. Let me show you. Logging into this magical MLS. Slowly. So it's good for more than just posting houses for sale, and it's good for having that database of past sales so you can see what buyers have been willing to pay for properties. I went away from my go-to, and so I'm paying the price. Okay, let me go back to my normal go-to neighborhood. Yep, that one always has listings for sale. So this is in Northeast Charlotte in Highland Creek. And let's go with the biggest thing in there so far right now. So this house in Highland Creek, they're asking $625 right there, asking price. It is an under contract listing, which means it is it is sold. Not yet closed, but not active anymore. Active would mean you could still make an offer on it. Somebody made an offer and it got accepted, and now they're in that phase of under contract. But it doesn't matter. Whatever the status is, under contract, sold, withdrawn, expired, active, they're still going to tell you at the bottom of the page how much they, the listing agent and the seller, are willing to share with you, helping the buyer. What's the name of the agent that's helping the buyer? What's one of the titles that we could call that agent? No matter if they have been hired as a specific buyer agent or not, they are helping the buyer in one of several possible ways, and there's a word for that. What's the word for it when they're helping the buyer? You got it. Jara says selling with an ING, selling agent. Good. Lock that in your mind. And so that listing agent has talked to the seller, and she said to the seller back when she listed the property, I know her, Consuelo, she said, look, here's how this works. I want to encourage other brokers, other agents who are subscribers to our MLS to bring buyers for your property. She probably said, I would love to bring the buyer all by myself, but odds are better if we open it up to other agents because there's a lot more potential buyers quicker. And so how much do you want to pay them, Mrs. Seller? How much of this commission that I've agreed to do this for do you want me to share with them? And so it's got to be the seller's permission, your permission as listing broker, your firm's permission. All of those need to align because your firm does have a say-so in how much they'll let you charge. In a market as competitive as we're in especially, it's probably no surprise to you that agents do lots of things to beat out other agents and get ahead. And one of those things is a race to the bottom that some of them try to do, meaning who can charge the least to beat out the next one. Not giving judgment. There's a place for that. If you want to charge as little as possible and maybe also reduce the level of service you provide, that is legal and allowable. And that's a perfectly valid business proposition. There's an agent I know and have known forever. And every so often, including the other day, he will post on Facebook and he says, just saved my sellers $9,000 in commission, because he has chosen to go all in with that business model. And he is what you would call a limited service broker. Limited service broker. You might have heard the alternate term for that we aren't supposed to use, and it's called a discount broker. Anybody heard of the term discount broker? A broker who offers a discount, a lesser amount of commission than the average broker. And that's what the problem is with the word discount, because here's the biggest thing, and here's part of what the lawsuits are about, and we're going to be covering tonight. We cannot, testable by the way, testable, highly testable, write this in your little crib sheet, notebook, whatever page you've got. We cannot say there is a standard commission. Illegal. Violates the Sherman Antitrust Act. But you hear it all the time, don't you? Right? Headlines, online, videos, people talking. I don't know how many times I've seen a Facebook group where a real estate agent Facebook group where they say, hey, what's the average typical commission in your market? And somebody says, well, the standard is 6%. And I'm like, no, you can't say that. I mean, major real estate coaches who have thousands of followers still say it wrong. The problem is you can get in trouble for it, because if you say there is a standard commission, you're implying that the consumer has no other choice but to pay at least that amount. And it's not true. The right answer is commissions are negotiable. And if that question were presented, what's the typical commission in your market? The proper answer is commissions are negotiable. Can you say my firm charges 6%? Yes, you can. You can, because your firm and you yourself have the right to make a business decision. You're not forcing the consumer to only pay 6%. They don't have to choose you. So it's okay to say, I charge 5%. My firm charges 5.5% minimum, whatever. You can say it. Your firm can pick a number and say, this is what our minimum is. That is allowable. What you can't do is say our entire Charlotte market charges 6%, because that is sort of like a monopoly almost. The Sherman Antitrust Act also covers monopolies. It's all in there. We'll get to that in the slide. The other stuff that it covers is literally that. You can't, maybe, let's say you work for a big firm and you've got thousands of agents, and there's another big firm that's your competitor. And you and that other big firm, by the way, there's a lot more smaller firms than there are big firms. Out of 17,000 firm licenses, most of them are little guys like me, little one or two person shops like me. But say you are the two biggest ones in your city. You might want to try to muscle out the dozens of people like me by saying, hey, other competing large firm, you take the west side, I'll take the east side. I'll stay out of your west side, you stay out of my east side. Does that potentially harm the consumer so that they feel like they can only choose you if they live on the east side? Yeah. You can't force them. You can't create this monopoly. That's also covered under the Sherman Antitrust Act. But the big one is the commission standard. There is no standard. Now, back to this slide. So Consuelo here has chosen between she and her seller and her firm to offer 2.5% to the buyer agent. What's that other number beside there? Sub-agency, 0. Who is the sub-agent helping? Buyer or seller? Let me ask it another way. Is the sub-agent helping the same person that the buyer agent is helping? Yeah. So this is a difference between how the buyer and the agent helping the buyer, the selling agent, how they have chosen to work together. They're both of these names of these positions, the buyer agent and the sub agent, are helping the buyer. It's just, which one are you? In other words, in order to be called a buyer agent, your buyer would have signed an official agency agreement with you, between you and your firm, naming your firm and you working for your firm as their specific exclusive buyer agent. If they refuse to sign that form, you pull that out, you say, hey, I just need to get started. I want to get started working for you. Sign this form, sign this agency agreement giving me authority to be your buyer agent. If you say it wrong and don't explain it right, and they feel kind of like you're maybe pushing them, they might refuse. And they'd say, I'm not signing that. I just met you. But I want to see those houses right now because you said you'd show them to me. But I won't sign your buyer agency form because I just met you. So you're in a predicament. You now could say, well, okay, I understand that. You don't want to sign it yet. We just met. Let me earn your business. Let me prove to you that I'm going to do a great job for you. And I'll let you kind of kick my tires, right? Like when you go on a test drive, you kick the tires, you try out the car. Let you try me out. And I will prove to you through my actions that I'm the right agent for you. So right now, if you refuse to sign the buyer agency agreement and you won't let me be your buyer agent today, then by default, my role for you is as sub-agent to the seller. I can still show you the houses. I can still write up the offers. I can even pull comparable sales from the MLS and share them with you. But don't tell me any of your negotiating secrets because you haven't hired me yet. So I get to help you as a buyer and be your selling agent, but here's the fun part. Strap in. I am the sub-agent to the seller helping you, the buyer, as your selling agent. Wait, oh my gosh, that was a lot of words. right? I hate, but love when I see that in the test question. They'll say, the selling agent helping the buyer as a subagent to the seller. And you're like, what? Just pick one of those words. So you need to know the terms. So let's break that down. The selling agent helping the buyer. All that means is the real estate agent on the buyer's side. We know it's that because it said selling. So they didn't even need to say the rest of it. All they had to say was the selling agent. And now you know that means the one helping the buyer, right? The selling agent helping the buyer as a sub-agent to seller. Now they have told us that buyer has not yet hired the agent as a specific buyer's agent, meaning filled out the agency agreement that makes them that. For whatever reason, either they won't or they just haven't gotten around to it yet. But right now, as it stands, that buyer better not tell anything confidential to the agent letting them in the houses. I have a feeling that agents don't treat this properly all the time. And while they officially are a sub-agent to the seller, they're probably banking on eventually becoming the buyer agent to this buyer and are probably going ahead and acting like it and letting them tell them these secrets and not disclosing that information they are told to the seller side as they really should. And that's why we're in this current lawsuit situation, because agents didn't do a good job of this explanation. They don't even understand it themselves. In CE classes, they get this stuff wrong all the time. And I'm like, am I teaching pre-licensees or 5-year agents? And sadly, they run away from the topic. And at this point in the business in North Carolina, it's really no excuse, because you've had 75, 80 hours of pre-licensing and 12 hours of which is this specific topic, then another 30 hours of agency-specific post-licensing 301. And so if you didn't pick it up and figure it out, you're just not paying attention. And it might also be kind of their BIC's fault too, for not hammering them over the head and requiring it. I'm sure most BICs are good, but a good BIC should make sure they are explaining this working with agents topic properly. And I've had some post-licensing students who say, I've talked to other agents and they don't even go over this. It's not that big a deal like they're making it out to be here in this post-licensing 301 class. And I'm like, you're right. It's not a big deal. Doesn't matter until it does. I'll let you talk that over with the real estate commission when they come calling and send you that brown envelope, send you that letter of inquiry. And now you've got to explain to them why agency doesn't matter in the proper explanation of it. In other words, it matters, right? And it just goes back to, does it potentially harm the consumer to not explain to them how all this works? So you got to get good at it to do this right. So what do we have here? Buyer agent. So if this buyer has hired an agent using that buyer agency agreement, now that is what they are. The selling agent helping the buyer is a buyer agent because they've hired him with a document. And if they've done so, congratulations to them. They might actually get paid for selling this house, because you'll notice that big, fat, ugly 0 on the other option. If all they are is a sub-agent, this seller and this listing agent is saying, go away. We don't even want you to darken the doorstep. Do not show this house. Do not make an offer. We don't want to work with you. Because why? Why might they want to discourage someone that is not a specific buyer agent? Why would they want to discourage them from working and bringing an offer on this house? Good question in the chat. I'll get to that in a second. It's liability. It's a liability situation, because as this thing is set up, the listing agent is always responsible for the information in this sheet. See, what do we have here? We've got a big old paragraph that they've written, 400 and some characters, and these days they're using ChatGPT to write some of it probably. They are putting in all of this detail, like the kind of shingles on the roof, the kind of flooring in the house. It has an irrigation system, all the community features. Is it on a crawl space or a slab? It's on the golf course, the garages, the room sizes. Well, not specific sizes, but the overall house size in heated living area. That's what HLA means, also known as square feet. All of this information, who put this together? The listing agent alongside the seller. And if you do it properly, and the busier you are, you got to do it a little more professionally to get this square footage number, especially if it's a complicated house to measure. You probably should hire the measuring out. So coordinating a professional measurer to tell you, and even if you measure it yourself, and I would suggest as a newer agent, you do measure it yourself, but also hire it out and then see how good you were. See where you missed and where you, right? So get better at, because even if you always hire out the measuring, you are always responsible for the numbers that they come up with. So you need to know it well enough to make sure they're doing it right. So measure them, those first few, maybe all of them, but then see what the one person you hired came back with. So there's the measuring, there's the photos, and it looks like they did a pretty good job of decluttering and staging. So, and it looks like professional photos, because those are really well lit. A big difference, guys. Oh my gosh. Have you seen bad MLS photos online? Or yeah, we've all seen them. These are good ones. And I'm the worst, pickiest, and I will just belittle and talk trash, not about an agent, but about the photos. So if they were bad, I'd be talking about them. These are good. But they put all this together. The acreage, the legal description. Oh, that sounds familiar. We learned that a couple of weeks ago. There's a actual legal description, the lot, the block, and then another number that we don't even really know what it means. We don't have to. Just put the whole legal description that you get from the tax record, just cut and paste it right in there. The whole thing, don't split it up. And then right here, the zoning. It's a planned unit development, PUD, and it's R9, which means relatively densely packed. It's a neighborhood with, well, there you go, quarter-acre lots. So all this info, if it's wrong, like the square footage is wrong, or it's not actually this zoning, or it's actually 0.16 acres because they got that wrong, those errors are going to be something that a buyer is going to be mad about if they close on it thinking it's smaller or less than what they thought they were getting. And so if all that's incorrect, the buyer could come after the listing agent and the seller and say, hey, you misrepresented, right? Because you are the representative of the seller if you're the listing agent, and the seller's the seller. If that buyer has a buyer agent that's been hired to be their specific buyer agent, then they're also going to come after them, because that buyer agent has a certain level of responsibility to make sure this info is verified as well. If they are not a buyer agent, but only a sub-agent to seller, and therefore in this case not able to make any money, then that buyer would go straight to the listing agent and the seller if there was some sort of a problem with misrepresentation, wrong info, right? They're not going to stop at the buyer agent because there was none. And so let's share the liability. If you're the seller and I'm your listing agent, I'm going to tell you, let's not be the only people they come after if we get things wrong. Let's add the buyer agent to the mix and share the liability, the weight of the liability, right? So that's the way I do it. That's the way I choose to do it and have done so for many years. I remember when it was kind of evolving into this, because once upon a time, I know I did this. I would say, okay, I'll give 3% to a buyer agent and I'll give 2% to a sub-agent, because I wanted to discourage sub-agency, but not weed out their buyer altogether. It's really a decision for your seller to make, but I highly advise to my sellers that we go 0 on the sub-agency line. But ultimately, if they want to say, I don't care, I'm willing because you're going to be sharp, Neil. I know you're not going to make mistakes. And I'm like, okay, I'll try extra hard this time. We're not going to make mistakes. I'm not worried about the liability. So let's not discourage a potential buyer just because they don't have a specific buyer agent helping them. And that's a valid point. And it's a business decision. It might even be something you need to check with your firm about. Hey, firm, would you let me offer commission split to a sub-agent at all? And in what way? How much, if any? They might say, no, we don't do that here. We only offer positive dollars if it's a buyer agent because we don't want that liability thing. Does that make sense? So that's why you might see that. This one's about to, oh, it's good. Okay, yeah. Yeah, it went under contract. Yeah, 10 days. It's pretty good. Pretty good these days. And it should have because they got new stuff, new windows. Oh, it actually went under contract and came back. One thing I like to look at too when I'm doing my research is the history. It tells a lot. And what we learn here is that they went on originally at 625, sold in 6 days, and then it fell through. They came back on the market and then went back off the market, sold again. We won't know until it closes how much they got for it. But all that fun stuff. Then if you can just click on a tab and it opens up the tax record. While we're in here, let's take a look around. I think I've shown you a tax record before, but here's the legal description again in a version of the tax record. Here's the parcel ID, the tax parcel ID that you use to find the tax record. And then it shows the tax values over the years. And look at that. The total tax value in 22 was $369,100. And then the following year, in this year, it went to $529,800. Because values go up. The taxing authority said, hey, we want a little more from you. So we're going to base your annual taxes on a higher amount now. Might be why they chose to sell it. You know? Then and there it is, the assessed change, 44%. And then go on down and it shows a little bit of detail about the property itself. Nowhere near as much as the MLS shares, but definitely like basic square feet, year built, lot size. SFR means single family residential. So what it's being used for, it has a garage. So the tax record gives some, but not as much detail. And then back up here, the photos tab, we saw the photos in another way. The history tab, we saw the history already. I usually will look at the map so I can see where it sits in relation to the ones around it. And it backs up to some common area, probably some, maybe, I don't think it's the golf course. That would be in green. So it's nice to see that. And you can also see the satellite view, just like Google Earth. So that's helpful too. They just reformatted this whole thing this past year, so we had to kind of learn it all over again. But that is a little bit about commission and agency. So let me see, with the commission offered like that on the MLS, is it still negotiable, or would that be considered that firm's standard? It would not necessarily be considered the firm's standard. And as to, is it negotiable? Right now, the answer to that is no. Whenever all these lawsuits get appealed and something settles out and they figure out how they want to do it from there forward, which might be years from now, who knows? Maybe. That's part of the lawsuit potential, is the seller's going to maybe pay buyers directly and the commissions are negotiable all the way up to the end or something. That is not what you need to know to pass the test now. So let's program the right frame of mind right now. The way we've always done it is what you need to be tested on and will be tested on now. And the answer to that is, once that commission is in the MLS, what would not be okay is for the buyer agent to bring an offer and inside the contract put their commission. I had that happen before. It was one of those where I was paying the buyer agent 2.5%. And that buyer agent, when she brought me the offer, she wrote an addendum and attached it to the offer to purchase. And in that addendum, it said, this offer is contingent upon paying the buyer agent 3 instead of 2.5%. Wrong. Not allowed. You cannot negotiate commission inside the contract itself. Flat no. And I told her that. And I'm not really a tattletale, so I didn't call her Bick, but I probably should have. Because she's also the one who found out at the closing that I got paid 3 and she got 2.5. So she was the one who threatened to tell everybody she knew about how terrible I was. But I still didn't tattle on her. I just thought, I don't know you. I've had one cross sale with you in 20 some years. So anyway, the answer that you need to know is commissions can't be negotiated in the contract. That is only between the buyer and seller, only between the parties to the contract, not the agents. If she wanted to change the commission to 3, there is a way she could have done that or tried to do it, but not by putting it in the contract. She should have contacted me ahead of time before the offer and said, hey, would you check with your seller and see if they'd be willing to pay me 3 instead of 2.5? And while that's a little out of the ordinary right now, I would have asked. She asked me. I'm an extension of the seller. And if I were the seller, I'd want to know that somebody was asking, and maybe that would have been the only offer. And I certainly don't want to make a knee-jerk answer that is not my answer to give that would discourage her client from making an offer. Because maybe they can't afford to pay her that extra 0.5%, and maybe she is the one they want to use, and I get it. I would have rolled my eyes privately, but I would have done it. But that's the way she should have done it, not putting it into the offer itself. The other thing, by the way, and this is not chapter 9 stuff, but I'll give you the second one because it goes together with this. The 2 things you can't put in a contract, one of them is that agent commission, and the other is some sort of agent liability protection. You can't put verbiage in there that says, hey, I might be wrong about some of this stuff. Don't sue me, bro. Right? Don't come at me. You can't put anything like that. And the way you see it professionally is something like, agent not responsible for square footage. This came from the tax record. Buyer to verify. That's not going to work for you. You're still on the hook, listing agent. You can put all the verbiage and use up those 400 characters if you want to, but you're wasting your characters. You can't put that in there. It won't help. You're still responsible for basic information and what you put in the MLS. Okay. Let's see. Let's cover a few more slides here. We left off last night talking about a general overview of these 3 types of agency. These are the categories that the agency that we use fit into. And so that buyer agency thing we've been talking about, that fits into the lowest of these categories. It fits into the special agency category. In other words, the least amount of responsibilities on behalf of our client. We can't sign contracts for our buyer. As a buyer agent, we can give them advice. We can give them guidance. We can give them our opinion. But we can't say, hey, buyer, I went ahead and accepted that offer for you. I just thought I'd let you know. No. Sometimes they ask us to. So you build so much trust with people quite often. If you do it right, they'll say, hey, I trust you, Neil. Go ahead. You know what I want roughly. Just don't bother me. Just tell me when you've accepted an offer for me that's at least $315. And I would very respectfully say, no, can't do that, but I will gladly make it as simple for you as I can. But I do have to show you all offers. I can't weed them out on your behalf. Not allowed. But so the level of buyer agency on this scale would fall under special agency. Same for sub-agent to seller. If you're helping that buyer as a sub-agent to seller, same thing. You're not able to sign things on their behalf. You're able to give them advice and guidance, but that's it. So the least amount of responsibilities that you, the agent, are doing for your client is special agency. It seems like it should maybe be switched, doesn't it? General sounds like the least compared to special, but it's not. And if you think about it, there's another example of two categories of something that we saw where general is actually a higher level than the special one. What is it? Where we've already seen once before that a general something is more involved. Yeah, a general warranty deed is better than a special warranty deed. So maybe that's how you remember this too, right? Okay, special agency, buyer agents, sub-agents to sellers, listing agents, tenant representatives, meaning you're helping a renter go find something to rent. All of those very typical job descriptions in this business of sales fit in that special agency bucket. The least amount of respect. You still owe them old car. I'm not saying you don't owe the full fiduciary, but there's a big difference in being obedient, loyal, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, reasonable skill and care, compared to signing something for them. What can you sign for them? What is there a type of agency where you can be a general agent for someone and actually sign a couple of things on their behalf? Which type of work that an agent does for a client might require that? Would it be a buyer agent? Would it be a listing agent? Or would it be a property manager? Yeah. Well, those first two I just told you it's not. So the new guy is what I just mentioned. So yeah, property management. Now, as a property manager, what's that owner doing? They don't want to be bothered with the boring stuff. They want to be the big shot owner of the rental and hire you for the small stuff. It's really not small stuff. They want to hire you to find the tenant, collect the rent from the tenant, tell the tenant that they're late on the rent, tell the tenant they're late again right before the eviction that they go to the courthouse and stand in your behalf for. And part of all of those duties involve signing some stuff for you, because if it were me and I hired a property manager, I don't want to do it. Don't call me at 2 a.m. and ask if you're allowed to spend $300 on a new toilet because it blew up. That's what you're there for, and I authorize you to probably even spend up to a certain amount of money without asking me, because I've hired you carefully, I've vetted you carefully as my property manager, and I've made sure that you're going to do a good job. And if you don't, you get replaced. Along those same lines, I'm not going to hire a new property manager every year. If you're doing the right thing, I'm going to keep renewing the agency agreement and keep you on as my property manager, because I don't want to go through that and hire one like a listing agent. You'd hire potentially a new listing agent with every house you sell, maybe, if they didn't do a good enough job, but you don't owe them any loyalty either as a seller. Sellers could use one of you guys to list their first house and you sell it and that works. And then 2 years later, they sell that one that you helped them buy also, and they hire somebody else. So that listing agreement is only good for that one transaction. With property management, it's sort of like keep renewing the agreement. Property management agreement can automatically renew. None of the other agency agreements, testable, by the way, none of the other ones besides property management are automatically renewable. They have to die with that particular property. And if they want to relist with you because it expires, then you need to sign a new one, re-up in that way, but it can't automatically keep going. So general agency includes two things in this business: property managers, because they can sign some things on behalf of their owner client. And the other one is what? What's another kind of general agent? What is something else that fits in that general agent bucket category? Another relationship. And I'll give you a hint, it doesn't involve a client. It's not a client relationship. Yeah, you're getting there, Sheena. More specifically, an independent contractor working for their firm. So it's the broker-firm relationship that fits in that general agent category. Because remember, I showed you the first page of the listing agreement. It said this is between the seller and the firm. And then we flipped to the last page and it showed where you sign it, not the broker in charge, just you, because you are a general agent on behalf of your firm. You are a sub-agent to the agent being the firm. And so you get to sign these agency agreements on. Your BIC doesn't want to be bothered. They've trained you, they trust you, and they said, go out there and get as much business as you can. Oh, you got another buyer signed up to a buyer? Great, turn that form in. I don't need to sign it, but I need to keep it in the file so we can have it for those 3 years that are required, right? So general agency, testable. 2 kinds of general agency in this industry: helping a property owner as a property manager, so a property management agreement, and then the agent to firm relationship, because you can sign things on your firm's behalf. And then we left off last night with the universal one, because that's the easy one. That's the one that's all encompassing. A universal agent is someone who can sign anything you want for them. You could assign an attorney, that's probably who is going to be a universal agent, to sign your business documents. They could handle tax return, business documents about the entity, whatever. That stuff can be handled by a universal agent, an attorney on your behalf. And it's also a power of attorney that could fit into that universal agent category too, which means anybody you choose and give the power of attorney to. You could do that with each other. Any one of you could make any other one of you your power, your attorney in fact. When you give somebody power of attorney for your decisions, you have made them an attorney in fact compared to an attorney at law. Attorney at law had to go get the degree and become a lawyer. An attorney in fact just was given permission by someone to take care of that person's decisions. So to recap, Universal can do anything the principal can do. Any business of any kind, no limits. Power of attorney or court order can create it. The court could assign somebody to be a guardian or an executor for someone else. The general agent is either a property manager making decisions for that owner, finding a tenant, evicting tenants, hiring staff, authorizing maintenance, routine maintenance. Also the firm relationship as an independent contractor, signing agreements, making decisions for the firm with regard to the clients you're working with, negotiation of offers and contracts and communicating with the clients. And then the special agent is the thing that we do that fits the most into what we do. Listing agents, buyer agents. Agent is authorized for specific acts, not every single thing, but very specific ones, according to that client's instruction. So brokerage, the act of bringing buyers and sellers together. You're the one, you're not the buyer, you're not the seller, you're the one who's pulling them together to make this thing work. And so a broker is licensed to negotiate or sell an interest in real property for others for a fee. What does it take to have a license? Doing real estate for another for compensation. And then you will start out your journey being a provisional broker, meaning you got to work under a BIC supervision. They need to know all of your transactions, the pain points, everything that's going on, the crazy drama. There's always drama. There's always some kind of thing that's happening. No 2 transactions are the same. And so you've got a buddy. Pick a good one. When you pick a BIC, interview them just as much as they're interviewing you. Make sure that your little voice is tuned in and that the promises they're making are not setting alarms off in your head. Oh, this person's just telling me what they think I want to hear. They're all going to tell you that they'll give you training. You got to look through that. But read between the lines. Will they really? I think they probably will. But on the off chance you find and run across one of them that's really into you more than you're into them, and they're telling you more than, or telling you what they think you want to hear, just be very careful. Be aware of it. And you can change. Don't think you have to just stick with somebody for 20 years. Those days are over. There's value in that. And I'm not saying change for the sake of change, But if it's not working, you might outgrow the one you started with after a year or two. And that is okay, because your business is going to change and evolve, hopefully quickly. Once you sell 5 or 10 houses, you're going to get a feel for what you like and what direction you want to go in. You may not want to grow the 15-person team, because that brings with it other challenges that aren't maybe the stuff you like to do, like managing and herding cats, managing people, right? That's a whole other thing that's not necessarily enjoyable unless you find it enjoyable. So it might be that you want to keep it small. You can do quite a bit of sales. You could sell $1 million a year with you and an assistant, maybe a buyer agent, a little 2-3 person team. You can be busy, but you can do it. That's a lot, or anything up to that. That's decent. It's probably better than what we're all making now, right? That's sort of the goal, is to make 6 figures. And the next goal is to make 500 or 250, and then 500, and then 750 a year, and then $1 million a year. And then it might be by that point, 4, 5, 6, 10 years in, by the time you maybe hit that, you're like, it would be nice to be on the plaque and beat out the other guy down the hall, but that brings with it a certain cost of time and stress level. And I kind of have a groove here. And if I could consistently make $500,000 a year, or even 250 a year, and still get to do other things I like to do with people I like to do them with, there's a lot of the flexibility there, right? So all that said, get it right the first time. Pick a good BIC. So the principal we've already talked about. That's who you owe those fiduciary duties to. It is the customer to the other agent across the tennis court net from you, or the pickleball court to be more relevant. Where did pickleball come from? Anybody playing pickleball? It's like, I didn't even know what it was before last year. And now everybody's putting 1 million of these courts in everywhere. So the principal's the client, the one who hired you. What creates agency? What is the document? It's these ones. It's between you and the seller, it's a listing agreement. Between you and the buyer, it's a buyer agency agreement. Or if they won't sign that agreement, by default, you are what? What are you automatically if they won't sign buyer agency with you? Sub-agent to seller. You got it. Now, we've got a new word here. Buyer agency. And they say, wait, is it oral buyer agency or written buyer agency? Wait a minute. Neil, you just told us that all agency agreements have to be in writing. I hope I just told you that. Well, I have now. All agency agreements have to be in writing, by the way. Testable. Write it down. But there's always an exception to every good rule. There's a little teensy loophole. And so that buyer agency thing, let's just say you're at the coffee shop of your choice. You meet a new person. They say, oh, you're a realtor. They know this because of all the stickers on your laptop as you're sitting there working, and that shirt that you're wearing says ask a realtor, and the hat and the name tag. And we are well branded in this industry. I don't do it, but a lot of them do. And people just kind of know, or you start up the conversation and they're like, oh, wow. Okay. You seem cool. There was a house that I went by the other day. What can you tell me about it? And that's all it takes. Boom. You're off and running. And now you're trying to find out if you can help them. And so you explain to them, okay, well, okay, since you're interested, since you asked, first of all, just to let you know, fair warning, don't tell me anything negotiable or confidential yet, because until you've hired me, and I'm sure we can decide to work together. If we decide to work together, I like to use that phrase because it kind of lets them know, look, I'm not desperate. You may not be someone I want to work with. You might be a big jerk. I discriminate against jerks. If I can tell you're a jerk, I am not interested. Well, that's only half true. I will put up with a certain amount of jerkitude if it means a payday. But the conversation is, look, I can help you as a buyer agent. You want to go look at those houses this afternoon? Okay, sure. But I don't sign anything the first day. I don't kiss on the first date. I'm not signing anything with you, they might say. And you could say, that's okay. I get it. We just met. Let me prove myself to you. Let's work together a little bit. I'll show you these houses and show you through showing these houses that I'm going to be the right choice for you. And by doing that, I can also, here it is, guys. I can go ahead and act like a buyer agent without it being in writing. That is the oral buyer agency relationship. You've just spoken it. Didn't have to be in writing for the purpose of letting them try you out, kick your tires. So that is the tiny little loophole. And so for an amount of time, you can have this relationship with them where you give everything to them. You give every bit of old car to them. You give them all of it. They don't owe you anything, though. That's the trade-off with oral buyer agency. You have to be their boyfriend, girlfriend, but they are not yours. They are platonic in your direction. You are committed in their direction. That means that if you're in an oral buyer agency agreement with them, which is not in writing, you're still protecting their confidentiality, protecting their loyalty, being loyal to them about whatever house they might want to look at. But the minute they decide they want to write an offer, now you have to explain to them, look, guys, we did this oral buyer agency thing to look at houses, but now that you want to put in an offer, the real estate commission requires that we put this into writing. I can't make an offer. I cannot write an offer for you unless I'm your buyer's agent in writing. So the oral buyer agency agreement relationship only lasts as long as what? What's the amount of time that you can be an oral buyer agent? That's it. It could be how long? A year? 2 years? As long as you're willing to mess around with them and not write an offer. But the second they want to write an offer on a house, then it needs to be put into writing. And no surprise that some people might drag this out a long time. And an agent might decide to work with them and show them houses every Saturday for a year. And eventually the agent's like, are they ever going to buy anything? But they don't have to get that agency agreement in writing until that time. That's when you need to control your time and lay some ground rules. And while we are complying with the real estate commission's directives, your business choices and your firm and your BIC might have something else to say about that. You've been a year showing to this person, and at the very least, maybe after the first couple of times out, let's go ahead and just get it in writing on principle. While you could have oral buyer agency all the way up to time of offer, nothing wrong with getting it done sooner, because it might at least weed out somebody from being just a person that's passing time. And I've heard stories of people that are bored, and so they know some agents are desperate, and so they will show them houses as much as they want to because they're just hoping and wishing. Not a great way to build your business. The minute you start getting busy and you start turning down good clients that actually do want to act within a month or two, then you're potentially losing business. So that's what oral buyer agency is about. Dual agency, we're going to get more into that, but that's another written agreement that creates agency. And it's really just built into the listing agreement or the buyer agency agreement. It's a provision within those agreements. Check the box if you're okay with me being your dual agent. Property management agreement. The independent contractor services agreement is between you and your firm. So that's an agency agreement too, because it's setting up general agency between you and your firm. Let me see here. Good question. Where is this in the syllabus? Let's take a look. Syllabus right here. Do it this way. We are approximately page 31. I don't remember if this is a instructor or student syllabus off the top of my head. But let's make sure. Section 7 is also chapter 7. So we've talked about all this stuff. General, we are right here now. So we're on page 28. And if that page is not right because it's a different version, then it's letter B, 4, little a. Okay. Independent contractor agreement is between you and your firm, not between you and the client. You're welcome. And then the written tenant representation agreement is between you and a renter that you're going to help find a rental property. This little note at the bottom, at the bottom there, implied agency, bad. No implied agency is allowed. What is implied compared to express? What's the word express mean? We saw it before in another topic. When something is express, what does that mean? Quite often people will incorrectly say it means it's in writing. It's not necessarily in writing, though. Express just means you talked about it, whether in writing or verbally, orally. You intentionally discussed it. That's an express agency agreement, and that's what all of those ones up here, these written ones in writing, need to be. And in order to be in writing, they are express, but you also, for the oral buyer agency one, that's going to be verbal, right? Implied agency is when you make them guess who you represent based on your behavior, based on your actions. And that's not good enough. For instance, classic case of how this could go horribly wrong. You're helping a buyer who is interested in a for sale by owner property, and you're just so darn nice and cute that seller, for sale by owner seller, just can't help but fall in love with you, and they think you're great. And you take advantage of that, and you let them tell you things that they shouldn't. They're negotiating secrets because your actions, by being nice to them and helpful to them, have implied that you are their agent. And that is not enough. You've got to actually speak it, say it. Hey, seller, I'm the buyer's person. I'm not your person. I know you can't help but fall in love with me. I'm pretty great, but don't tell me secrets. And that's essentially what the unrepresented seller agreement, the FSBO form, says. Specifically, it says, hey, keep your secrets to yourself. Keep things confidential because the agent involved here is a buyer agent that you are working with. You are your own agent. They are that buyer's agent. Don't tell them anything you don't want the buyer to know, no matter how friendly they are. If you guys go on like a little field trip for yourself and pop into a sales center, like a new construction neighborhood sales model home, which I do recommend you do, that's going to be, most of them are really good at building rapport really fast. Like a good car salesman, they make you feel comfortable and listened to, and they really warm up quickly, and they're just great at it. That's why they're doing that. They have to be, because the odds are good that if you leave, they're not going to see you again. So they need to make the best impression, get you hooked, get you excited, and make you feel like they are looking out for you. And they kind of overstep that boundary quite often. But some of them aren't even licensed, so they can't really violate a commission rule if they're not a licensee. But yeah, they are. If they're good, sure, they're going to say, are you working with an agent? That's a good point. But go in there and just Tell them, look, I'm just here to, I want to check out your inventory. Let me just go through. I'm not here to buy anything. You don't want to waste their time, but eavesdrop on them. When somebody comes in after you and it's an actual client, hear how they interact with somebody that is a potential buyer. And it is a lesson. They are so good at it. And take that and run with it. No harm in being approachable and being quick to build rapport or friendliness and make people feel at ease with you. That's a skill that serves you well in this business, but it doesn't give you permission to take advantage of it just because you can win them over as a friend. You still need to let them know through your words who represents who, and that they shouldn't tell you anything until they've hired you. All of that, all those traits and abilities will help you get hired faster, but don't, with great power comes great responsibility, right? Somebody once said that in a movie, I think, or a comic book, or both. So implied agency is not allowed. Your actions aren't enough. You need to tell them who you represent so that they don't harm themselves by telling you secrets that you now have to disclose to the other party. When we come back from break, we will talk about some compensation things. See you back here in 10. welcome back. So we've already talked about this stuff. And by the way, just for your information, there is a good bit of crossover from chapter 7 and chapter 8. So what we cover in 7, we're going to reiterate in chapter 8. And you'll hear me repeat things. And most of these things do bear repeating because it'll help you realize, oh, wait, super important, testable. And this is one of those things. Express agency, as we said before the break, is either written or oral. The point is it is intentional compared to implied agency, which means they have to guess based on your actions. Well, that is not allowed. Okay. All righty. There it is. Illegal. Implied agency is illegal under North Carolina license law. We have to let them know what's going on. And they all have to be in writing. All agency agreements have to be in writing. If there were true and false versions of the questions on the test, the answer to this would be true. All agency agreements have to be in writing. And as I pause, I hear a collective, yeah, but across all of your brains. Because you're thinking, well, Neil, you just said oral buyer agency doesn't have to be in writing. And that would be an easy way to miss that question. So think of it this way. While oral buyer agency gives you an amount of time up to an offer being made, amount of time for it to be not written, you'll never get paid as an oral buyer agent because you got to put it into writing at the time of offer. You can't make it all the way to the closing table. So if you want to get paid, then all agency agreements have to be in writing. Think of it that way. So the answer that you might see on the test would be more in line with that. Yes, oral buyer agency lets you not have that particular kind of agency in writing for a little while, but it's never going to get you past the contract phase. That's a good question. It is still valid and official. It still holds you to the responsibility of protecting their confidentiality and being loyal to them. So the oral buyer agency, that's another testable thing they like to test you on here. The agent, and it's not going to be statements like I'm making. It's going to be more like they write out a descriptive paragraph of a situation. In this situation, broker Bob is a buyer agent for Sally, but only as an oral buyer agent. Sally finds out after broker Bob shows her 10 houses, she finds out that her cousin just got a real estate license, and the cousin offers to write up an offer for one of those houses that broker Bob showed to her. Is broker Bob entitled to any commission in that situation? She was working with broker Bob as an oral buyer agent. He showed her 10 houses. But then the next day, she found out that her cousin just got a real estate license and she would rather work with her cousin, let her cousin earn the money. Can she switch over to her cousin? Or does she have any sort of ties or obligation to broker Bob legally? Forget about ethics and morals and being cool or not cool. She is not held to any sort of obligation. She can absolutely switch. Because it's a one-sided thing. It's a open relationship for her. She can cheat on Bob all she wants. It's not cheating because that's what oral buyer agency is. Giving the buyer the freedom to work with anybody they want to or as many people as they want to. But you, as the oral buyer agent for her, have to give her all of the old car fiduciary responsibilities. That's why in update courses, when I ask those 60 or 80 agents in the class who are actually out there doing business, Hey, just curious, either because you don't want to or because your firm won't let you, do you ever act as an oral buyer agent for people? And I hear quite a few of them who say, no way, because I got nothing in return. And it's probably because they got burned. And I bet in most cases it's because they didn't quite do it the way they should have, by the way. So I usually blame us for things going sideways because it's either because we're running away from proper disclosure. We don't really want to have the tough conversations. We get excited and work with somebody hoping we'll win them over with our charm, but not talking enough about what these things are all about. So it's usually the agent's fault when they get cheated on. But occasionally it's just flat out wrong that somebody does. It's not cool. But yeah, she's got the freedom to work with whomever. That's why you might want to give her the afternoon or the first one as an oral buyer agent, but you should probably follow up quickly and say, okay, now that that's over with and I've shown you how great I am, let's go ahead and make it official. Let me make you a priority in my business along with my other buyers who have hired me. Because you see, buyer prospect, it's not fair to the ones who have hired me for me to spend too much time with people who haven't in writing. That's one way you could say it. Because the sooner you have the strength and the confidence to issue those sorts of, not really ultimatums, but like, here's how I work. The certain phrases kind of just create respect in their mind. They are conditioned to think of us as disposable, by the way. Because if you ever go on Zillow or any of those types of sites offering info and you put in your contact data, I would say do that just to see what happens, but I don't even want to wish that on anybody because you will get nonstop calls from agents because they are paying those websites to give them what they call leads. And the leads are not given to just one of them. It's given to like 5 or 10 of them. And they pay every month to get the leads for that particular area. Some of them pay $3,000 a month or $5,000 or $10,000 a month to own a certain area and get all the leads along. Not all of them. They have to race to the phone because it's going to be them. If you look on the side of those websites, it's about 5 agents that are highlighted and featured. They paid to be there. If it's my listing, you'll see this dark little shadow figure with no face on it at the bottom, and they have to put that because I'm the listing agent. But it doesn't make me pretty and featured, and it's not all a nice color photo and all the fancy looking stuff because I don't pay for that privilege. But if it's my listing, they have to disclose my info on there somewhere. But I'm probably not going to be the one getting called because the consumer, are going to be drawn to one of those others that are full color, full nice big pictures and stuff. So I forgot how I ended up here, but we'll just keep on going. Let's see, compensation versus agency. We touched on this before. Just because the seller's paying the buyer agent commission does not mean the buyer agent owes them the most fiduciary responsibilities. Who pays you is irrelevant compared to who you owe old car to. Compensation does not determine agency. Who you're loyal to may not be the one who's paying you. Your buyer's probably not who's paying you. You're probably getting most of what you're expecting and willing to earn from the seller. More specifically, the seller paying their listing agent and their listing agent sharing it with you. But that whole time, you are looking out for your buyer and keeping secrets from the seller. You're not entitled to tell the seller the things you know about your buyer's willingness to pay more than they've offered. They're trying to lowball $730 on an $800,000, but they'd really come up to $810 and go over asking. You do not owe that information to the seller if you're a buyer agent. You owe the confidentiality of that fact to your buyer, even though the seller is the source of your commission, probably. How does agency get terminated? Well, our favorite way is because we're all done. Successful closing. You got paid. Congratulations. The agency's over. Next month, if they decide to buy another one, you're not going to automatically be their agent again. Hopefully you will, because you won them over. But the thing you just had them sign for this deal does not extend to that deal. That's the main thing. You'd have to sign a new one. So agency termination, completion, best possible way. The second one, expiration. Here's another testable item. All agency agreements have to have an expiration date or a termination date, with the one exception being a property management agreement, which can have an automatic renewal, but none of the other ones can have an automatic renewal. So if the question is basically such and such agency agreement must expire or must terminate, true. That is true. That's the answer choice you want to pick. They have to terminate. You can't. There are agents that will market with the phrase, I'm your realtor for life, but that doesn't mean it translates to the paperwork, because and I've had them where I've helped one person buy and sell 12 houses over the last 20 years. They always come back to me. Thankfully, I'm thankful for that. Not all of them. Some of them cheated on me and went somewhere else. They didn't cheat on me because they didn't know anything to me. But I also didn't do a good enough job with them to stay front of mind. I probably should have stayed in touch better. Again, I blame myself when these things go sideways. So that transaction is its own thing in and of its own little thing. And you got to earn the next one with that same person. Mutual agreement. We could say, you know what, guys, we gave it a good shot. You hired me to sell your property. It didn't sell. And now you're kind of burnt out because it was 6 months and you just don't want to do this right now. You need to take a breather. And I get that. And maybe the listing has expired and they just don't want to re-up with you. Or maybe they have another 2 months left in the listing term and they're asking if you'll let them, or if your firm will let them out of the listing agreement. Wait a minute. What? Neil, did you just say they can't fire you? Yes, I did. They can't fire you. You can't fire them either, because an agency agreement is something called bilateral. Both sides owe things to the other side. If it's a frustrated seller that doesn't want to sell and you won't let them out 2 months early because the expiration is in 2 more months, good luck. You're not going to be able to force them to show it. They could shut down completely and not allow any showings, and they don't have to accept any offers, even full price or over asking. So you're not going to have success if it's a combative relationship. But point is, they can't just go on off 2 months early from the term ending and pick someone else. They would be kept from hiring and relisting with a different firm until your firm lets them out of this. And your firm could choose not to do so. Expiration date, who determines it? It's negotiable between you on behalf of your firm and the seller. And sometimes the seller plays hardball. It's been a long time since I've had a seller challenge me. I will write it for at least 6 months, sometimes a year, because most of the time I have a pretty good relationship with them and they trust me. That's why they're hiring me. And I'll say, look, guys, you never know what's going to happen. It could be that we get a buyer and we get up to a week before closing and that buyer just flakes out and walks away. I hope that doesn't happen. But if it did, if we only had like a month term here, then I would have to get paperwork signed again with you to get it back on the market. And I'd rather just hit the ground running and move on and find that replacement buyer for you and not take extra time. I haven't even had to say that most of the time. I just say, here's my term. I put it for 6 months and they sign it. If they challenge you, it's probably because they don't know you. And the difference between working with a past client or a referral or a friend is that they probably won't. But if it's a cold call kind of lead, then you might have to have some scripts and dialogues ready to explain to them why you have a term of whatever months. It's just going to depend on the days on the market, really. You can rationalize it too. As you saw, that sheet that we just looked at, they sold in 10 days. I just sold one in 18 days. A year ago, I sold one in 18 minutes. Not exactly, but certainly same day. So it depends on how long things are taken that you can say, look, guys, if you only want to give me like a 2-week listing period, then we could probably just end this appointment now, because that's really not fair. Because I'm spending money and time up front. This is a front loaded side of the business. When you're listing things, you spend a lot of time and money up front for the thing to just kick in and start being out there on the product on the shelf. So you want at least a certain minimum, a reasonable minimum. And that's when it's good for you to have that confidence to say, here's what I do. Here's how I work. Oh, you want less than a 3-month term? Well, maybe I'm not the agent for you, or whatever duration you decide is smart. The BIC might have some input there as well. They would certainly train you and give you some insight. They'd probably pretty much base it on what I just explained as the rationale. I had one where the buyers wanted to buy multiple acres, like 10 to 20 acres. Older couple, well, older meaning my age, and they had an adult son. So they wanted to live in the house that was on the property and then let the son build a new house on the other side of the property, like a little family estate or something. And we found one, and we put their house on the market, and we got a buyer for their house. The tricky part was that buyer had the house to sell. So it looked like this. It's the classic domino effect. And here's my client who was also a buyer. And so here's their house for sale. And I got it listed. And once they closed, oops, one second. There we go. Once they closed, they were going to buy this one. But the buyer we found, oh boy, here's that thing again. I don't understand. Here's the one I helped them sell. And then they were going to buy this one next. The buyer for this one had a buyer for theirs. And so here's ours. And so if this one failed, then this one would fail, and this one would fail, and then they couldn't buy this one. Sure enough, this buyer back here flaked out and decided not to buy. And it just knocked them all down. Now, it was in the start of this crazy market, so I told my people, hey, let me pick you up, dust you off. Sometimes you got to be a cheerleader. And it's okay. I know this is not ideal, but if you let me put this right back on the market, I think we can find a replacement buyer soon enough that we can still let you be able to buy this. But a lot had transpired. They were worn out. They were burnt out. And they said, you know what, Neil? And honestly, I think actually they picked this house, this one, without the son being around, the son and daughter-in-law. I think they didn't like the property so much. And so they used it as an excuse to bail, and that's okay. I worked for another firm at the time. I think this was 2017. And so it wasn't a bad split, but it was a 85-15 split. I got to keep 85% of whatever came in. Pretty good split. But I didn't get any leads from the broker, but he was cool. So, and he also let me pretty much run things the way I wanted to. He didn't really have a lot of policy and procedures that kept me from doing things. If I wanted to do it for 4%, he would let me instead of 5 or 6. And in this case, they asked me, you know what, we want to take a break. We've got 3 more months left on the listing agreement. Would you let us out of the listing agreement? And I talked to my BIC, and because I officially needed his signature, and I said, here's the deal. I want to let him out. And he said, fine, you do you. And he signed what I needed him to sign, and they went away. And that was okay. I stayed in touch because I had also helped them with about 5 transactions over the previous several years. So I kind of had them on lock in a way. So I let him go, that whole thing, that relationship thing. If you let me fly away, it's true love, they'll fly back or whatever it is. A year later, they were ready. They got excited again. They found one. They didn't buy that one, but we looked around some more and they found one they liked, and then they bought. And coincidentally, and to my advantage, I had left that firm I was with, not through anything bad, but I just chose to start my own firm. And now instead of 85-15, my split was 100-0. I didn't have to give any to the firm because I was the firm. So that was kind of a nice little bonus, all for letting them out. They could have easily picked someone else, and I wouldn't even have known until it was all done. So there's a risk, but I let him out. There in other news, I had a friend who worked for a major luxury brokerage, and that brokerage had a change of management, and the BIC left, and they sent up a replacement manager BIC from Florida who just kind of swooped in and said, let me just fix this place up, and issued all kinds of directives. And it really did not sit well with my friend. And she had about 10 listings. And most of the way it works when you get a listing, people list because it's you. Rarely do they list because of the firm name that you're affiliated with. It's usually because you won them over and they kind of want to go with you. So when she chose to not deal with that luxury brand anymore and go out and do something else with her on her own, here's the way it works with the real estate commission. They say this: if you jump ship and you have sellers, who is the relationship with for the listing agreement? Who is that listing agreement between? The client and who? Yeah, the firm, not you. And so she was prohibited from telling her friends, her sellers, who were also her friends, that she was going to leave. The real estate commission will not let you. They say you better be quiet, sit back, wait for your firm BIC that you're leaving to contact those sellers and tell them, oh, she's no longer with us. Oh my gosh, she's dead? No, she just, next worst thing, she's leaving us. I'm just kidding. But they would say, she's no longer with the firm, but don't worry, we will reassign your listing to a great agent and take good care of you. All of those sellers of hers said, we don't want that. We want to go with her. But most of those listing agreements were only halfway through. So I think it was at least 2 or 3 or 4 more months on the term. And so the way that manager chose to handle it, which I found pretty stupid, was to say, okay, if you want to leave and go with her, we'll let you out of the listing agreement for $2,000. You got to pay us and we will let you out early. And that was their right to do so because they didn't have to let him out at all. Now, it wouldn't have sold if they had held him. And I don't know who decided to leave and who went and stayed and whatever. I never followed up to find out from her what went down there, but they could have easily made it impossible to sell. They could have not shown it, not allowed any showings, not accepted any offers. They could have gotten 50 offers and accepted none of them. Because as we'll learn in chapters 9 and 10, even if you get a full price offer, the seller is not obligated to take it. Because it's more than price. It's price and terms and dates. And they could just say, I don't care. I'm not taking it. So it's not that broker, that BIC, had anything of value by refusing to let these sellers leave. They were really just trying to, I think, make it hard on my friend because they were mad at her for leaving. Because there's just no way that's beneficial or productive. But those are the rules. You got to let the firm BIC tell the seller that you're leaving, not you. I have a feeling most brokers, probably not her because she's a straight shooter, but I think a lot of brokers in her position would have not followed the rules and they would have gone ahead and told their sellers, look, I'm going to be leaving. Just to let you know, the BIC will be calling you. But that was not the right way to do it. You could get in trouble for that. So anyway, those are examples of mutual agreement. Let's not do this anymore. But it would have to be agreed upon by both parties because an agency agreement is a bilateral agreement. Operation of law could terminate agency, like something happening in court. For some reason, we're not going to have this house for sale anymore. Destruction of the property. If it's a house for sale and it blows up. In the Charlotte area in Ballantyne a couple of years ago, a house blew up from a gas line explosion, and it was a basement house, and all the stuff, all the wood just fell into the basement, and the overhead chopper view from the Channel 9 or whatever, it didn't even look like enough lumber to ever have been a house. It was so sad. I think the wife died in the explosion. But if that house had been on the market, not under contract, but on the market, upon its destruction, the listing agreement would be destroyed too. No longer for sale. No longer an agency agreement. Breach can terminate, meaning one of the parties, either the firm/agent or the seller, does something that they promised not to do, and they broke their promise, and so therefore they breached. So the agency agreement could go away because of breach. And then the death. But let's be careful about this one. Death of who? If the seller dies, is the listing agreement dead as well? Seller dies, does the listing agreement go away, terminate? Listing, not contract, right? And in this case, yes, listing agreement goes away if the seller dies, because that is not a decision for the estate to carry on. Some of you might have been thinking, yes, the answer is the opposite of that, but you're thinking of a contract. If you were under contract, then the contract would survive the seller's death. It would be up to the estate to carry it out, the estate and the heirs. But just a listing, so be careful when you see these questions. Stop, pause, and think to yourself, wait a minute, this is a red flag topic. I'm going to give you, I have a sheet of red flag topics in Notion. This is one of them. Are we talking about a contract or a listing right now? Reiterate to yourself which situation, circumstance you're talking about before you write the answer, because your brain might take one thing and answer it in light of a thing that's not what they're really talking about. Go through and make sure you locate in the question. It's a property for sale, a listed property, and it burns down. Does the seller's heirs, do they still have to sell? Is the listing agreement still in place? No, it was destroyed along with the property, basically. Or the question says a contract, it's under contract, and the property burns down. What happens next? Well, in chapter 9, we'll get around to telling you that it's not the seller's choice how to proceed if the property is destroyed when you're under contract. It's the buyer's decision. The buyer would have to decide if they want to take the proceeds from the insurance payout and rebuild the property and go ahead through with the sale. That's for the buyer to decide, not the seller. And if the property is destroyed and it's under contract and everybody wants to keep going, then it would be beholden to the heirs and the estate to honor that contract. So be careful and acknowledge and identify in the question, which phase of this process are we in? For sale phase or contract phase? What if it's the death of the listing agent? Your bright shining face on the sign in the yard, and you jaywalk across the street and get hit and die. Is that listing agreement dead with you? Or is it still in effect because it was never between you and them? It was between them and your firm. And your BIC is going to very sadly and tears in their eyes call that seller and say, oh, he crossed the street in the wrong place and he died. And we're sorry to have him no longer with us, but we are going to reassign your listing to a great agent and take good care of you. So death of the listing agent? No, still a listing. It could just be reassigned to another broker. Death of the seller? Yes. Listing is over. Buyer agency agreement is over with the death of the client, not the death of the agent. Types of agency agreements. Well, we've covered most of that already. Listing, buyer, management, tenant rep, and we'll look at those a little more closely. By the way, these are in the documents folder in your Google Drive. So I'll let you know. And here's some homework to add to your reading between now and next week. Go ahead and find the listing agreement and the buyer agency agreement and give them a kind of a look through. Look through and try to identify like the price or the commission split, the names of the parties, the term, the dual agency provision, whether the place where you would say whether they're going to let you do it or not, dual agency. And so just get familiar. You don't have to memorize it, but look through it, read through it as if you were thinking about hiring me to be your buyer agent or your listing agent, and you'd want to be somewhat familiar with the document before you signed it. So that level, just take a look through it. Okay, here's what we could set up when we get hired. A firm could choose to only represent sellers. I think they would be crazy, but they could legally. They could also choose to only represent buyers. They could also choose to only represent one or the other, but never both. That's number 3. Single agency means if I'm working with a buyer and that buyer wants to buy one of my listings, I will not do that. I'm not comfortable being a dual agent. I'll only be a single agent. I'm either helping people sell or I'm helping people buy, but I'm never a dual agent between them. That's what single agencies is talking about. Dual agency is that weird one that was forced to exist back when the atoms collided in mid-1990s and buyer agency came around. With that Edina Realty lawsuit settlement, it changed real estate forever. And now, instead of only seller agency, it created buyer agency. But then the more they looked at it, the powers that be, the authorities, the real estate commissions, they realized, wait a minute, this isn't enough. It's not enough just to add buyer agency, because what happens now if a buyer calls you on your yard sign and wants to write an offer and they don't have an agent yet and you do it? So number 1, the first question that they had to answer was, are we going to make it legal and allowable for one agent to be in the middle of both parties between buyer and seller? And when they decided in North Carolina, yeah, let's do that, and we'll call it dual agency. The next question was, okay, well, what are the rules about that? Is the agent allowed to tell the buyer that the seller is asking $700 but would really take $680? In other words, are they required to tell the secrets of each party? Well, that doesn't make any sense. Nobody's going along with that. So no, confidentiality must be maintained with dual agency. What about this? If the seller inevitably, and I bet it happens a lot, seller says, hey, wait a minute, a buyer called you on the sign that I let you put in my yard, and I've known you for 4 months and hired you 4 months ago, and I know you already, and you just met that person. Don't you owe me at least a little bit more than them? And shouldn't you have to tell me some of their secrets but never tell them any of mine? I could understand a seller incorrectly assuming that, either acknowledging that that's not allowed but expecting it to be done anyway, right? And so North Carolina Real Estate Commission ended up with this little batch of rules over dual agency. They said, out of the old car responsibilities, you owe all of them except loyalty. So the loyalty's got to go when it's true. I call it true dual agency. True dual agency means just one broker. Well, not necessarily. It could be multiple brokers, but they're holding hands. If it's multiple brokers, they're working together. And they're between the seller and the buyer. These are the brokers being dual agents. It could be one of them. It could be several. And out of old car, they've got to give all of it except the loyalty. In other words, the seller's going to expect them to tell, hey, I know you're bringing me this buyer's offer and my asking price is $700 and they're offering $650, but what's the real number? Between you and me, because I know you and that buyer's brand new, they just called you today, you never met them before, go ahead and tell me, what would they come up to? You can't say. You don't owe that seller. That would be being more loyal to the seller than than to the buyer. And that's why loyalty is off the table. Be careful with this question. If the question asks something like, which fiduciary duty is no longer in effect with dual agency, some people say confidentiality. I used to. But you still have to keep their secrets. But you can't be more loyal to one over the other when you're a dual agent. Imagine this. You're a consumer, and I've just explained how this works, and you're like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Why would anybody agree to dual agency? And I'm going to say, you're right. I agree. It's dumb. Loyalty, I don't want to give up loyalty, but I could. If you let me, and my firm lets me, and the seller lets me, and I choose to do it and go along with it, it's a thing that we're allowed to do. But I totally understand, Ms. Buyer, potential client who's thinking about working with me, and I just explained dual agency too. The response could be, you could say, well, I'm out of here. This is dumb. I do like your listing, but I'm not doing this dual agency thing. I'm leaving. I'm going to go down the street to your competitor. I'm going to find an agent in that office to become my buyer agent, and then we'll come back here and make an offer on your listing. You could see that maybe being a natural thought. And then that's when I would say to that person or to you, hey, wait a minute, I've got a solution. Let me save you the steps and the time. Rather than you go back down the street to my competitor, how about I make it so that you can have your own agent looking out for you and I stick with the seller? And so we're basically accomplishing each party has their own agent situation, all within the same roof of my firm. And that is called designated agency, or more specifically, designated dual agency. With designated dual agency, that's what's happening. The buyer is going to be given a broker all to themselves in my firm. And the seller gets me because I'm the listing agent. So I'm going to work for the seller. The buyer gets you might be asking, well, how do you know who it is? Your firm has 100 people in it. Who do you pick? A couple of ways. Officially, if you don't know who to pick and you're a provisional broker and you're just unsure because you're brand new, your BIC will do it. Your broker in charge will figure out, let's pick so-and-so agent to represent this buyer as they make an offer on your listing. Or if you know somebody, because as you develop relationships, you might just tell them, look, I got a great person in mind. She's around the corner, down the hall from me, and let's connect you. I think you'll get along great with her. She can be your designated dual agent, and I will stick with the seller, and we can now return Old Car to its full glory, and you get the loyalty of her, and I'll be loyal to the seller. See the difference? Designated dual agency restores loyalty. True dual agency won't allow loyalty over one of the parties versus the other. The reason loyalty is restored with designated agency is this. There's now a broker for each party. Each one gets one. Each one might get multiple. You could have 2 or 3 or multiple designated buyer brokers. It could be a whole team, all of whom are designated dual agents representing the buyer. And then it could be you and your team. You might have a team of 5 or 6 or 10 or 20. And all of you and your team are designated seller's agents helping the seller. It's not about the number of agents, except designated dual agency is at least 2 brokers in the same firm. True dual agency, it could possibly be just 1 broker. You with me? So that's a trouble spot. That whole true dual agency versus designated, it's confusing at first. So take it slowly, and as you're reading through in the material and more questions come up, just let me know and I'll walk you through it. But I hope that helps. And then transactional agency is something you'll see in your textbook. We don't do that in North Carolina. Transactional agency means the agent is facilitating and loyal to the transaction, not to either of the parties. So they're just carrying out the duties. But in North Carolina, you have to represent somebody, at least one of them, if not both of them. In other states that do transactional, you don't have to represent anybody. You could just be like the attorney, sort of, carrying out the transaction, no representation of either buyer or seller. To recap, seller agency means this: the firm takes listings only. They always represent the seller. They never represent the buyer. If they did work with a buyer, third bullet point there, they could, but never for the buyer. They could remain the listing agent. And if a buyer called them, they could say, hey, buyer, I can write up the offer you want to make on my listing, but don't expect me to give you any confidentiality. Don't tell me any secrets you don't want the seller to know. Because as far as you're concerned, I am the seller. It's that level. So you could be the only agent. Listen to this one. Pay attention to this one. It's the time of night when things get sleepy. So I get it. But you could be a listing agent and someone calls on the sign, says, I want to make an offer. You could be the only agent in the transaction while not being a dual agent. Just because there's only one agent involved doesn't mean it's automatically dual. You got to ask more questions. You've got to read through that question more fully, all the way to the end. So dual agency isn't all about the number of agents involved, because you could be a listing agent that chooses never to do dual agency. Hey, seller, if you hire me as your listing agent, I will never be a dual agent. I don't want to, because I don't want to compromise the loyalty for you. I'm doing it for you. What about what if a buyer calls and wants to see it and they don't have an agent? I can still help them. But it's sort of like how I would do it if it was a for sale by owner situation in the reverse. As a buyer agent helping a buyer who wants to buy a FSBO, I'd have to tell that seller, look, don't tell me any secrets you don't want the buyer to know. I only represent them, not you. This is the opposite of that. Now you're representing the seller, telling that unrepresented buyer, hey, don't tell me any secrets. You are your own buyer agent. I can walk you through the process. I can give you the documents. I can even give you some comparable sales from the MLS. I can't translate them for you and tell you what you should offer, but I can provide them and answer your questions about the basics of the process. I'll even give you some suggestions on various vendors and inspectors and get you all the way to the closing table, because it helps my seller by doing that. I'm helping my seller by helping you, because you're wanting to buy my seller's property. But make no mistake, don't ever tell me any secrets you don't want my seller to know, because essentially by talking to me, you're talking to them. So that's the bullet point on number 3 there. Never dual agency. You're only ever representing the seller side. And that's what it might look like as a cartoon. Here's old Byron as a listing agent. He works for Sarah, the seller. He does not work for Giannis, the buyer. He could also work and entertain buyer offers from other firms. This one down here at the bottom. But if he's interacting directly with people, he could assist Giannis as a sub-agent to his own seller, or his own seller. He's his own seller's agent. He'll never do dual agency. He'll never do buyer agency. If you're doing the same thing but for buyers instead of sellers, then you're this exclusive buyer agency, always representing buyers, never sellers. That means you'll never take a listing. That's a tragedy and a huge mistake, because listings are how you get a life in this business and still earn money. The couple of times I've ever played golf, I've sold a house because I had listings and one of them sold. I probably should play more golf. I haven't learned that lesson, right? But you can be at the movies and get a little text notification that you just got an offer, or an email. Hey, got an offer on your listing. You did all the front loaded work. You put it on the market. You took the pictures, you advertised, and it's just out there floating. It's like selling stuff on Etsy or Amazon. Oh, something sold. Better mail it off to them. It can be doing that while you're doing other things like selling more houses. So by not taking listings, you're really doing yourself a disservice, but theoretically, that's what this would be. Exclusive buyer agency, not listing properties. Again, not doing dual agency. You're only helping the buyer. And that's what that would look like. Same concept. And then we've made this point already. Hopefully you've all learned this now. The selling agent ending in ing is always on the buyer's side of the transaction. But that doesn't necessarily mean they are a buyer agent. They could be a sub-agent to seller, helping that buyer. In which case the buyer should be warned, don't tell me any secrets. And then we talked about oral buyer agency, and that's what this is. We covered that pretty well already. So we will keep going. This is single agency again. You're not interested in doing dual agency. And quite a few of my Update CE Core students are at this place in their business. They don't want to do dual agency. You'll either represent the seller or the buyer, but never both at the same time. Oh, yeah, we talked about that already. What else? So just a little terminology to know if it's in the same firm. If the transaction is happening under the same firm, then it's an in-house transaction. It's not hard to grasp that concept. And in which case, the brokers involved, Byron and Layla here, they are either dual agents or designated dual agents. They're either working together as dual agents between the parties and therefore would be holding hands essentially, or they could each be representing their respective clients as designated dual agents. So it just depends. They need to give you more information on the test question before you'll know. This would not be enough info. If they are working for different firms, it's a co-brokerage, the term co-brokerage. So if you read the test question and the word co-brokerage comes up, you'll instantly think two different firms. We are not dealing with the same firm in-house sale. And therefore, if it's two different firms, can we have dual agency? Is that possible? Not possible. Dual agency only works within the same firm. It's very specific to an in-house sale. We'll talk more about this when I see you back here in 10 minutes. Have a great break. 1 second. Sorry, guys.